Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, thought leaders globally in crypto and blockchain. And it's always an amazing time uh, and very awesome time having wonderful guests. So today I have an amazing guest. His name is Barney Mannerings. He is the founder of Vega Protocol. Barney, welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
Thank you for joining me. So, first question I ask is, what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Sure. So I'm a computer scientist originally. I studied computer science at university and basically started my career for the first 10, 15 years in traditional finance. Worked as a sort of technology consultant, designing and building trading systems and risk systems. So yeah, that part of my background is pretty logical. Obviously, we're now designing and building trading systems that work using blockchain technology. But yeah, that's my background there, and also got into Bitcoin in sort of 2013, 2014, and Ethereum around the pre-sale as well. So have been in the crypto space for quite a while too.
So you've seen a lot before. So we're gonna get into that a little bit. Let me ask you first, what is Vega Protocol all about, and what makes it unique?
So Vega is what I think is now called an app chain. It's a blockchain that's sort of designed specifically for uh, sort of building and trading on derivatives markets and other financial markets. So the idea of Vega is sort of similar to how, I guess, exchanges and other financial infrastructure work. That finance is a pretty sort of high performance demand on technology. It requires high performance systems. It also requires very specific systems around risk, systems around fairness, and things like that. And what you find if you look into Ethereum or other general purpose chains is that some of the things that make a lot of sense for a general purpose system, kind of like same as WordPress on the internet, is great as a general purpose website builder. Probably not a good idea to build your centralized exchange, your order book on WordPress, and it's sort of the same thing. Once you look at Ethereum and these other exchanges, whether it's how they prioritize transactions and order them with things like MEV, or how they choose fees, those things don't make as much sense for trading, and so you see things like crazy high fees, you see things like MEV, and you see all these sort of things happen. And what we worked out when we were designing Vega, which was always intended to be able to replace traditional finance and centralized finance for at least some use cases, was that in order to have a good shot of doing that, we really needed the kind of freedom to design sort of every part of the stack specifically for that use case.
Great. So, um, you have a finance background, and one of the things that DeFi is trying to do, I don't know if it's done it successfully or not. See if I got involved, but like bridging that gap, whatever it is, between traditional finance and decentralized finance. So, how do you do that, and what capabilities do you help create?
Sure. So sort of when you talk about bridging the gap, I guess what we really mean here, well, there's two things, I guess. One is to become or to be useful for the things that people are using centralized finance for today. And I guess the other one is that, in order to participate in the sort of blockchain and DeFi ecosystem, the money that exists today and the funds that exist today and the assets and everything else need to become sort of represented on the blockchain. So you need to move money on chain, and then you need to actually find that it's useful to do so. So getting things on chain, I think, is an industry-wide problem. It's something that touches everything from custodians to wallets to integration with banking to the regulatory environment, and it's actually something where we much prefer to partner and work together with the industry to solve those problems for the entire sort of industry. Where we can help is by demonstrating that with Vega, that we've actually designed a platform that enables the creation of markets and products that are fair, enables the creation of markets and products that are sort of useful and not kind of, sort of getting away from the, I guess, traditional view of blockchain and associated technologies as kind of being a place where really it's just about speculation and get rich quick and number go up token stuff, and into actually a world where you say, wouldn't it be great if financial innovation could be like innovation on the internet, and people could innovate from anywhere in the globe and could have, free and open access and all of these other things. So we're designing a system very much to make those things possible and make them useful and valuable in the real world. Obviously, we're sort of very much at the alpha stage of that now, so it'll take probably a few years before those things are really making a big real world impact. But we've always designed with that goal in mind, and I think that's probably having those real world use cases will then make it easier to convince people to kind of connect up the sources of money and to treat the rest of the environment seriously and actually make it make the gap easier to bridge.
So in bridging that, um, what do you see as the low hanging fruit, and then what do you see as something that needs to be on the horizon that we're not touching yet?
So I think the last week or two has been a big example of a huge pile of low hanging fruit. In that what we've so far done is actually create a system that sort of needs all the protection that traditional finance has, because it's opaque and because it's run by sort of corporate leaders and companies, and no one can see what's going on. So we've kind of created a system that needs all the protection you have with TradFi, but doesn't have it, and occasionally blows up, in this case, really spectacularly. And so I think the low hanging fruit here are to just demonstrate that actually we have a workable alternative, that we're not actually just shifting to a less regulated and more sketchy version of what we had before with different people in charge, but actually we're building something that's interesting and different, and has this ability for more innovation, more global connectivity, lower fees, and all the other things that we sort of promise and talk about a lot. So I think, to me, the low-hanging fruit of that, just move the crypto ecosystem, which already has billions of dollars of trading and lots of use, even if it's mostly within the ecosystem, move it onto decentralized infrastructure, demonstrate that we can keep this stuff secure, demonstrate that we can have a good solution to recovering wallet keys and keep it non-custodial. And once we demonstrate this stuff actually works and move our own ecosystem in that direction, then maybe other financial ecosystems and other people who need access to these products will start to take it more seriously.
You said the key word there was spectacularly. You were around what 2013. You said so. You were around for Mount Gox, and now you're around for this FTX debacle. So, why is this worse now than it was back then?
It's worse. I mean, it's partly worse just because we should have learned. It's partly worse because we actually have some decent decentralized alternatives that we could be using. It's partly worse, even from a regulatory standpoint, like sort of having a company in a far off land that does something. We used to do trading card game. Mt. Gox was a Magic the Gathering trading game card trading system originally. So having this thing turn into a trading platform for Bitcoin sort of unexpectedly in this nascent industry was, sure, okay, you don't see what's happening, but like we've seen regulators come after all kinds of things that turned out not to be scams and not to be frauds and make life incredibly difficult. And this was, a lot of these people were in the US, a lot of these people were cozying up to US regulators. And so to have all of that, and the one thing that they can't stop is that, and the one thing that goes wrong is that, it's embarrassing for the traditional system and the regulators, and it's embarrassing for us as an industry, to be honest, that we're still using these kind of things. So, I mean, I feel like it's worse just for all those reasons. It's also massive in scale, and everything I read just seems crazier and crazier. So I don't know. The Mt. Gox thing was fairly straightforward, as of a lot of other things. This is anything but straightforward.
Yeah. So you talked about regulators there. I do want to get into derivatives, and I'm going to get into them shortly. But I want to ask you, people don't talk about this, but the regulators, killed another market before they decided to come after crypto. They killed the SPAC market, right? And that's a traditional market in finance. And you know, why are these people afraid of innovation instead of embracing it? And what do you think could be possible if they decided to embrace the innovation?
Difficult to say. I mean, obviously these people have their own motivations, and I think a lot of them are motivated by genuinely wanting to protect consumers and users and the people, the little guys. The problem is a lot of the time you have, I guess, competing interests. You have an incentive to, if something new turns up, you have an incentive to say that your regulator is sort of in charge of it and gets to regulate it, because then maybe you get more money and more resources to regulate it, and you get sort of more control over the market. Um, you also have a set of rules that have, and sort of requirements that have been handed to you by whichever government you're regulator for, whether it's Congress in the States or somewhere else. And those rules probably set out what you can and can't do. So it's probably a lot easier to start blindly applying existing rules to everything in order to sort of bring it under your purview and to work out how to do it, than it is to think about something new and regulate it. And this is not just finance that has this problem. Like in the UK, we have this problem with electric scooters and things like that, and electric skateboards, and that technically they're motor vehicles, so they're still illegal to sort of own and ride on the roads. I mean, hundreds of people, thousands of people do, but technically they're sort of illegal. And rather than try and take this innovation and run with it and see what people do with it and give them the freedom, it takes a very long time to change these things. So I think there's a lot of momentum in there, and it's a lot easier to do that than it is to take a punt on something new and risk something blowing up. When you've permitted it, it's much easier to come along. This is a favorite of the regulators, is to not actually tell you how they want to regulate crypto, but instead to wait until someone does something they don't like, and then come after them and tell them what they did wrong. Is sort of regulation by enforcement, and that's also problematic. So I don't know. I think it's a tough one. The incentives are not super aligned, and really it probably takes action from politicians to set out what they want and give regulators a bit of a clearer direction.
Great. Well, not great, but great. Thank you. so, um, let me
It is
ask
what
you
it
this:
is.
it is what it is. I went to Hanoi in 2004, and when I was there, um, there was motorbikes, motorcycles, like mopeds everywhere. And now you see pictures, and there's also cars. So, and it's only almost 20 years later. So, you know, um, so we'll see what happens. So my question is, I want to talk to you about on-chain derivatives markets, right? What are the risks? Well, what are they, first of all? And then what are the risks, both inherent and, since you mentioned, political, and how can we begin to address those issues?
I mean, I think this is the sort of the big fundamental difference. Is sort of summed up by the often repeated crypto phrase of "don't trust, verify." So in the traditional world, you're risking, you can't verify, you have to trust, and you can try and trust a company, or maybe you trust your government, and so you've got to look at, is there a compensation scheme covering a product or whatever, and so you're sort of forced to trust. In crypto and sort of open source software in general, you have the ability to verify, and one of the things that sort of creates the risks is that you have the community have the ability to verify, but maybe they don't have the resources to verify as much as a bank or a defense company or something. If you're building a fighter plane, or if you're building a bank, you have huge amounts of money to spend trying to make sure everything is perfect before you launch it. These programs take decades to do. But even technology programs in banks, fighter jets, whatever, they take a very long time and they cost a lot of money. In crypto and open source, you don't have that, and it was true with Linux, and it's true with crypto. You have this open software. Everyone gets the chance to verify, researchers, users, everyone, but it takes a lot of time and resource. And so, you see this situation where you have a lot of risk simply because it's new, because it hasn't had that many eyes on it yet, and because it's complicated. So I think early on and right now, what we've been seeing in the sort of first wave of DeFi is a lot of things sort of thrown at the wall. Some of them stick, and some of them sort of also blow up in spectacular fashion, but in a way you perhaps expect. You maybe more expect this from early open source software. And I think look at Linux now. Two things have happened. One, it's been underpinnings of much of the server infrastructure of the internet for decades, and so it's very, very battle tested, and everyone trusts it. And two, as that has started to happen, and large companies and governments and everyone else has started to rely on it, they have poured huge amounts of money into making sure it's secure. people like Google, people like IBM, people like Intel. So you've had both things sort of come together, and I think the same thing can happen with crypto. You've got these risks, mostly around the design and implementation of this complicated software that's new. It's going to be rocky at the start, but the more and more money, the more and more people, the more and more usage and adoption and benefit people see from it, the more those people who see that benefit, and as time goes on, there will be larger and larger institutions doing this, the more they will be incentivized to spend their money to make sure that it's not broken and to make sure that it works as expected. So I think the risks are around that software and the security of it, but the prognosis is good. Over time, it's only going to get more secure. It's only going to get looked at more. It's only going to get better.
I walked my dog yesterday and I ran into a guy who consults hedge funds, and he was talking to me about stocks. And I usually don't like to listen about stocks because I'm into crypto. Um, but I've been hearing people say, he used the word dividend. And yesterday was the first time that I got it. People look for dividends because they can trust the management, right? And that's an important thing. And I never put two and two together before, that dividend equals trust. But with the spectacular blowups, with the FTX situation this year, and Celsius and whatever everybody else, right? In CeFi, right? And you're building an app chain. So how can people start to trust decentralized app chains, without the fear of being wiped out? And what's the benefit as opposed to CeFi?
I mean, the first disclaimer I'm going to give is that we're building an app chain. We're very early in that process, and um, you know, our chain is not yet like even processing trades in mainnet. And when it is, it'll be an alpha, and you shouldn't trust it. You should assume it's broken, and we're actually putting sort of controls into the system that the community can use to kind of limit the size of their exposure and to make it more difficult to take a large position, because we don't think people should just jump in there and use it. So the first thing is, when it's new, you shouldn't trust it. You should sort of go in cautiously, understand how early this piece of software is, or each thing. But over time, as I said, people will grow more and more confident. Look at Uniswap. I would say, the versions of Uniswap that have now been deployed for quite a long time and that appear to continuously post transactions, and they don't seem to be exploitable. We understand how they work. We've seen those things happen for a long time now, and I would say we're starting to trust them. Or Bitcoin. Bitcoin now is trustworthy. When you look back in the history in its first few months and years, there were multiple cases where the Bitcoin community had to get together and quickly paper over something and fix something that was broken, and would have been a huge problem if someone malicious had found it. So the trust partly comes with time, partly comes with more eyes on it, more money spent, audits being written, all of those things. I think. But the great thing about those things is that, how do you trust exchanges? After Mt. Gox and after the others, you might think, well, people are going to be more careful now. And then you see, this guy who's friends with the regulators and, appears to be one of the grown-ups in the room. And then look at what happens. So the problem with the exchanges is each new one is just a new person who may be trustworthy and may not, or who may screw up, because we're all human. The good thing about these sort of app chains and everything else is that the longer it's been live, it doesn't change. The code doesn't suddenly decide that it wants to steal the money. The code doesn't suddenly do something riskier than it's usually used to do. It just carries on being the code. The other thing I would say, app chains specifically, is you can design these things to reduce the surface area. So, when you look at some of the exploits that have existed in DeFi, for instance, on general purpose chains, some of them relate to flash loans. Now, flash loans shouldn't be a thing, because what a flash loan is a bit of software that basically um, can find out whether or not it runs, and so you can borrow the money for free. You basically get to borrow the money for free, but for zero time. You don't actually ever borrow it. You just call a method on a smart contract, and if the method basically gives you back as much or more money than you started with, and you pay the loan back, then you get the flash loan. And if it doesn't, the whole thing fails. Now, that's not a real product. That's not a thing that should exist in the world. There's no such thing as a loan that exists for zero time, other than because this blockchain is programmed in a way to let you do that. An app chain like Vega is kind of like, it knows what order books are, it knows what orders are, it knows what trades and positions are, and it just doesn't have the concept. You can't do you could do a flash loan to send to our bridge, but at the end of the flash loan, you won't get paid back because the money will be in the bridge. You won't be able to go and use that to trade and then do something weird. So that's just a small example, but it's an example of how app chains can be designed. Constraints are very useful. If you have a system that can only do a small number of things and those things all relate to trading, the probability someone finds something sort of slightly unrelated to trading that they can exploit and cause a lot of pain is a bit lower. And it's not a be all and end all, and it won't solve every problem. And there's still many risks. But I think taking an app chain and designing it with a more limited set of features that are specific to a use case does make it easier to reason about and easier to kind of test and prove its security in the long run.
I just had a flashback to like 2019, and I haven't seen these in a while. But in crypto, we used to have these things called scam wicks, right? Where the price would hop up and down real quick, right? And I could just see a flash loan like working in opposite and wiping you out in like a few seconds. So, you know, and I don't want that to, people's thought of decentralized finance because it's more important than you're working with order books. So, but I do think that, a lot of institutions are getting into DeFi and not as much retail, but why should retail be in there as well as institutions in DeFi?
It's a good question. I mean, I think um, retail is an interesting one because, for a start, the retail environment in different countries looks very different. For instance, I think it's quite difficult to sort of have retail access to derivatives at all in the US, whereas in the UK you have things like CFDs and spread betting that are pretty commonplace. So there's always a different sort of situation for everyone. But in general, I think the advantage of DeFi is that the access is the same for everyone. So if you're retail and you're talking to a sort of centralized exchange, you've got to assume there are some big players who either because they do more volume have lower fees, or maybe they have a market making contract with the exchange, or maybe they have some other contract, or maybe the exchange is bailing them out, or whatever else. There's kind of a lot of exchanges work with the industry and the people who pay their fees and give them the money, and that sort of means that you're at a disadvantage potentially if you're retail. You might not be. Maybe the exchange is completely fair and gives the same access to everyone. But in DeFi, you can know that's true. You can know that you get the same access as everyone. You can know you're on the same sort of level playing field. So I think that's a good thing. And I think as we start to see DeFi platforms, gain a lot of demonstrated proof, like Uniswap I used as an example. Like I think if I do an exchange on Uniswap right now, I'm probably feeling better about that in terms of the probability I still have those coins in a year's time than if I do it on any of the centralized exchanges. I mean, you sort of look at them all rushing to like prove that they are definitely solvent right now. I wouldn't want to leave a large amount of money on any of them, at all for a year. Whereas I think with some of these platforms that have been around for a while in DeFi, I think we're in a position now where you probably can trust using those platforms at least to a reasonable extent, and that'll be more and more true.
Great. So I wanted to get like, I don't think anybody knows right now what the short term, medium term, long term future is of crypto. I mean, um, I want to get your take on what you think is going to happen in the short and medium term and how we can build for the long term at this point, at this juncture with all the craziness.
Yeah, in the short term, your guess is as good as mine, and I think I, I strongly suspect we're not done. And just because FTX was so big and the amount of money on it, every so often you see someone sort of new tweeting that they had half their reserves or their entire fund on FTX or whatever. So like, I strongly suspect we're not done with the fallout of this. I'm not sure. Maybe we see some more exchanges go the wrong way as well. It's certainly possible. So the short term, I think it's going to be a little painful. But I also think it's a good opportunity for us to reorient around building, to reorient around DeFi, self-custody, learn how to do those things, like take your funds off an exchange, learn what a wallet is, work all that stuff out, and don't just sort of sit there using crypto like it's the traditional finance. I think is a good thing to do in the short term. Medium term, I think the very exciting thing is the number of things that were funded in the last bull market and even the one before with really large amounts of money, really, really smart people, great teams, great cryptographers working on them. Yeah, some of them are alternative L1s. Some of them, yeah, the people who came out of the sort of Facebook blockchain team when that kind of dissolved, doing crazily interesting things. DeFi projects, bridging technology, things like IBC, things like the Cosmos ecosystem. I think there's a huge amount of building going on that's been going on for a while, and these things take time. Like we know, it's taken us quite a while to build Vega because it is an L1, it is an app chain, it's something complex, and there's a lot of other protocols and projects probably in the same boat where they've been building this technology for a long time, and there's some very smart people there. So I think in the medium term, we're going to see, what's like the sort of next wave of more sophisticated, higher performance, more scalable, more usable, better wallet tech, all of that. I think we're going to see that come in a big way over the next 1 to 2 years, and I think it's starting to sort of drip out now with some of the L1s sort of, moving to mainnet, and it'll continue. So I think that medium term is going to be super exciting because we're going to start to see some really interesting tech. Ethereum's merge finally happened, which means they can start thinking about the next parts of their roadmap. So everywhere, super cool stuff in the medium term. I think it's going to be really exciting technically. And then if you look to the longer term, I think what we'll hopefully find is dropping out of that technically exciting stuff is real functionally useful real world use cases, real world benefits, systems that people use because they're better than what they have today. And whether that comes from a sort of underbanked type of world where people have access to products for the first time, whether it comes from things like compound treasury and their kind of attempt to do really boring interest rates on chain. Not sure, but I think in the very long term and in the longer term, we will see these real world use cases start to develop, and once they do, just like with the internet, which everyone dismissed, it'll snowball and everyone will realize how much better it is and how much they hated paying Visa and MasterCard every time they made a payment, and all of that. So, I think when we look back, it'll be kind of, it was obvious that everyone wasn't going to pay Visa and MasterCard for everything as all transactions became digital. But right now it doesn't seem obvious. But I think in the long term, we'll sort of end up looking back and saying, yeah, well, that was obvious.
I agree. I went to grad school back in 1996 to 98, right? And I was doing my homework and I was sitting there with the computer and the dial up, and it took like a half hour to be able to dial up to the internet. And today you just click a button, you know? So,
Absolutely. I remember when people talked about video on demand. Are you going to watch TV on the internet? And everyone is sat there, dial up, this tiny postage stamp, real player, and all this nonsense, and going, this is never going to work. No one is ever going to watch TV on the internet. You're an idiot. And then now streaming is the biggest thing, and the internet's so fast everywhere that you can do it on your phone from the top of a mountain. So people sort of forget how much technology moves on, and these things that seem clunky and bad and difficult, the UX gets better, the speeds get faster, and suddenly they become completely obvious.
I agree. Awesome. So I want to thank you very much for your time today. This has been a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed talking to you. And I have one last question, and that is this. How can people find out more information about you, about Vega Protocol? How can they, start to use it one day? How can they get involved? How can they do any of that?
Cool. So the website is vega.xyz. You find most of everything there, including social links. Our Twitter is at Vega Protocol. My Twitter is at Barnaby with 2 E's at the end. Yeah, you find us there. We also have a Discord, which is probably where the community hang out and chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Jamil.